This video is about why everything feels pointless recently. If you'd like to skip the animation straight to the video essay, please click on the timestamp as seen on the screen.
Tantris, I've noticed your resting bitch face looks a little more bitchy lately. What's the matter, champ? Did we accidentally kill your new puppy?
More like my soul. Sometimes, I don't know why I'm here. Whenever I take a look at this desk in this cubicle and see the same gray walls all the time, I realize I should be out there enjoying my life. You know, like a healthy person. You ever thought of it, boss? What if escapes like Disneyland are the real world, and this one is actually just fake? It's all bullshit. But not like you, of all people, are going to understand, Mr. Corporate.
See, Tantris, when I was your age, or even younger, I learned that there were two kinds of people. Strong people and weak people. I learned that it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, and you gotta do whatever it takes to get your way to the top. If that means stealing from little Girl Scouts or taking out of Grandma's purse when she's not looking, you do whatever the fuck you gotta do. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm a strong man. Just look at this place, and look at you, sitting there all limp with your shoulders slack like a weak little lima bean. You're full of soy and probably some Greek yogurt in there with plenty of seed additives and oils. So straighten up and fly right, bucko, where your ass is grass, and so is your contract here.
Ooh, I'm gonna regret that.
Call the cops! Call the fucking cops! You're fucking fired! Get the shit out of your desk and get your shitty Honda out of the parking lot blocking my Jaguar! Fuck you!
Well, whatever, I'm keeping this stapler. You and I are not truly living. Whether or not you're a religious person, we've mistaken that while science may answer objective questions about the material world, it's not an objective metric for moral and ethical ones. Just because we can observe that atoms exist doesn't mean that atoms hold any objective meaning beyond the fact that we can see them. Think about it. What is the moral value of an atom? Well, in today's world, no one would know how to answer such a question because our worldview deems things like that irrelevant. Our ability to break down reality into smaller pieces has changed the way humanity seeks out the meaning in life, because the immaterial, as a result, has become nothing more than an imaginary concept in the eyes of most, and therefore all meaning is subjective, even meaningless. With the lack of that true meaning, especially while working the same repetitive routine every fucking day without any real gains, just to maybe buy some clothes here and there, many prefer dulling the mind over a beer to forget about that purveying nihilism. In high school, when I was feeling nihilistic and bored with life, I'll be honest with you all, to stave off the boredom of modernity, I would smoke weed. And even though I haven't toked in almost a decade, I can say that the THC in that plant taught me more about life than all of my public school teachers combined. I didn't grow up in the most booming, interesting part of the country either. A certain cold Milwaukee, Wisconsin, covered in snow 5 months of the year. And Wisconsin is definitely a state you've heard of, but probably don't pronounce properly. And while it's known for cheese, slap-on-the-wrist DUIs, and the Green Bay Packers, the coupling of the nihilism, palpable loss of buying power, and the mere fact that there's never anything to do drove me insane. The nihilism of our time has been absorbed by all facets of life, considering the loss of communal spirits. Many towns I've visited in America are shells of their former selves. If you grew up in the Rust Belt part of the Midwest like I did, you know how bleak towns can get. Collapsed buildings, dirty apartments, nothing to do. Detroit, for example, went from looking like this to this. I used to walk around the east side of Milwaukee as a teenager and spent most of my time daydreaming through the streets because it was preferable to sitting alone in my room and having to fend away the loud thoughts screaming, "Why am I here?" I remember going to a sandwich shop in the middle of a snowstorm, and the slushy snow outside, the dying streetlights, and the depressed look of the cashier in that fluorescent lit room made me want to die myself. I mean, if we were all happy to see each other and had anything to celebrate, like Christmas before it turned into a culturally sensitive topic, maybe things would be better. But what the fuck are we even doing here if we can't even make a living, let alone feel connected by anything, I'd always think. Just play the song Alphabet Town by Elliott Smith and hear that droning harmonica in the background. It kind of felt like that, but even more hopeless. Am I going to be here forever? Why am I going to school learning useless things for a job that'll make me hate my life even more as an adult? The adults themselves never gave me satisfying answers for what life should be. Even the "do what makes you happy" sort of message somehow felt empty. I just wanted more. So I started occasionally smoking out of boredom by going to my friends' houses and spending time in the basement to escape, blasting grunge music like Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, and whatever grunge rock I could get my hands on. However, I've realized growing up that the difference between being a nihilistic teenager and a nihilistic adult is teenagers aren't yet so bored and jaded with life that the idea of the future is difficult to find exciting. But as an adult, unless you find a way to affirm life itself, that future is bleak. I'll spare you the rest of the details, but I remember one freezing night in January 2016. I was looking out over the quiet shoreline of a frozen Lake Michigan in the dead of winter, high as a kite, and it was at that moment I was transported into a new consciousness. Smoking weed is like a key that unlocks all of the rooms in your mind, and then they all open up at once, leaving your conscience to wander around in search of new discovery. And as I was wandering, I started to think about the universe and humanity's insignificance by comparison, including all those cashiers, shitty jobs, classes I had hated. The universe itself is 13 trillion years old according to contemporary science, and given that fact, our life is mind-bogglingly short on that scale. I realized at that moment every person who was ever important to me, every profound and unprofound thought I'd ever had, would one day go poof and disappear, forever. And that apathy of this universe, which laughs at the fact that it will continue on after my death, just as it did before my birth, stabbed me in the heart with a dagger, on which the following message was inscribed: "Someday, you are going to die." And from then I found myself no longer wanting to stick around in Milwaukee, but rather to live in a way that affirms life itself, away from wasting away at home, a life of action and not of passivity. It's only gotten worse now that everywhere I go I see people who aren't truly living, sleeping away on the internet in a time when this short life is ours to cherish. And today, I would like to make a brief inquiry on the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. In historical terms, a good Christian lived for the afterlife, heaven, if you will, and erstwhile followed what was known as asceticism, denying one's indulgences to be a man of faith. But Friedrich Nietzsche found this idea stupid and ill-conceived, and instead advocated for a life of self-affirmation, a life of taking on challenges for self-transformation. He spoke of eternal recurrence, where if you were to die today and had to relive your life exactly as it happened up to now, would you do it again? Can I say no? No! But this willpower, he said, was the necessary answer to the horrifying potential of humanity in the new age of the abyss. How this could all go wrong he described as the last man, the weak man who didn't seek greatness in God's absence, he who ultimately would seek out comfort and mediocrity above all else in the absence of that objective meaning, value, or purpose. And these weak people would wreak absolute chaos on society. The modern idea of replacing action with simulacra, an empty existence which denied a life of becoming. But what is that becoming, and how does a man know right from wrong? To call Nietzsche a moral relativist would be short-sighted, but theoretically, if God or some divine truth does not frame all lesser truths, then all judgments hold equal weight, right? Like, should you kill yourself, or should you subscribe? I think you know the answer. If there's no reason to live for anything beyond this world, then the most rational thing to do is create the most ideal conditions for oneself while one can before he dies. Or in ethical terms, whatever brings about utopia in the here and now. Schrodinger's truth, if you will. Seriously, Schrodinger, is the cat dead or is it not dead? Yes. This leads us to one of Nietzsche's most powerful but also ambiguous ideas, the will to power, his answer to morality and truth. What is good? All that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man. What is bad? All that proceeds from weakness. What is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that resistance is overcome. For Nietzsche, traditional religious and societal morality misrepresent what really drives humanity forward. Instead of judging actions as good or bad based on their conforming to arbitrary social norms, he says we need to judge them by how much they increase our sense of strength, vitality, and capacity to overcome hardship. Has anyone else noticed that no other time in history has apologized for human nature as much as us? Nietzsche noticed that the truly powerful have no need to prove their might to themselves or others, and that only weak men wish to hurt and seek the signs of suffering. If you're on top, the world will treat you like so. This is a radical departure from the asceticism based on humility and self-denial, instead emphasizing life-affirming values, aiming to live resiliently, rather than be governed by compliance with external standards. Had Nietzsche lived today, I believe he would have hated modernity's emphasis on the weak. Part 2. The minds beneath the throne. He who rules the world influences the thoughts of all below him. In regard to the will to power, when our psychopathic leaders simultaneously hold cynical worldviews, one way or another, it trickles down into the minds of the rest of humanity. However, the elites continue to live more luxuriously, as demonstrated by their net worths, while the rest of us are left with nothing, not even meaning. Without that financial comfort, a purpose in life takes on a new level of importance, a yearn for anything with answers. When truth is more valuable as a tool to be manipulated than as something to be admired in its own right, you end up in a culture that is insecure, paranoid, and anxious, and which bleeds online, where most discourse becomes vitriolic, angry, and defensive. With the tech elites being as powerful as they are, one would think that their ideas have dominance over exposure. They don't care about humanity as much as they do propping up the new digital world while leaving behind the beautiful, real one behind. Just look at architecture 100 years ago and now. Buildings serve very little purpose but to house offices in which people work. Why spend all of that time on a beautiful work of architecture when you can do it in the virtual world? Again, Nietzsche would have hated the internet for distracting humanity from actually living by feeding them slop that provides no substance to the human experience. But unlike you and me, most of society is not interested in developing their own ideas. They just go with the accepted worldview, and which worldview doesn't get you canceled? You already know. See, this is why I love you guys. You all ask questions. Ha! Gay! As we learned, Nietzsche was a harsh critic of the weak, and I'm well aware some people are opposed to a fusion of Nietzschean and Christian ideals for obvious reasons, mainly because he referred to Christians as suffering from a slave morality. But the truth is, I don't think it's just Christianity which manifests some of these issues. Slave morality is a concept he wrote about in The Genealogy of Morals, where he contrasts it with the superior master morality. Slave morality originates from the oppressed classes in society, particularly in the context of early Christians against the Romans, and argues it values humility, meekness, and compassion, as these are seen as virtues by those who lacked power against those Romans. In contrast, master morality values strength, assertiveness, and nobility, traits that were celebrated by the ruling classes or those in positions of power. The slaves, unable to assert themselves directly through force, reframed their weakness as virtue, an inversion meant to undermine the power of the ruling classes by shifting the moral system in their favor, which Nietzsche saw as life-denying and believed that this type of morality suppressed human vitality, creativity, and power. But ironically, the slave morality of this Christianity became the powerful worldview that dominated in the Middle Ages. I am and have always been critical of our modern time for its victim mentality, which asks of no self-transformation, but rather pity and apologetics to venerate the weak. Much of Western civilization already hates itself and is attempting to get back at the competent. If you hate yourself, it's an invitation for your complete and utter annihilation, by your own hand, might I add, hence nihilism. And Nietzsche was trying to advocate for an ethic that was able to withstand the abyss opened by that modernity. If a Christian repents for his sins, attempting to act out the truths in the Bible, at the very least salvation awaits on the other side. Modern progressivism, namely cancel culture, doesn't allow for redemption. Once you're canceled, once you've stepped out of line and made a mockery of yourself in the eyes of those who uphold the tenets of the elite, you're done. There's no hope for you. And any idea of an apology is met with lukewarm forgiveness at best and vicious social ostracization at worst. This is a recipe, though, for the resentment of millions of people who couldn't fit the mold of the perfect human desired by this class. I would certainly say I'm among those people. Nietzsche, on the other hand, would have been opposed to the culture influencing the mind altogether, and instead would have advocated for taking responsibility into one's own hands by crafting your own values. People on our side of the internet hardly take cancel culture seriously anymore, due to becoming such an overused tactic by narcissists and psychopaths who believe in their own moral superiority, and use this slave morality to attract good-willed people. The dangerous side to this aggressive takedown of competence as a predictor of success has bred a new kind of Darwinism. The continual undermining of skill-based merit has led a growing number of disillusioned men to view this other extreme, social Darwinism, as not only justified, but refreshing. They find appeal in its cold, realistic view of the world as a place governed by biological and behavioral determinism. This view, rooted in ideas about inherent superiority, is gaining traction because it offers a counter-narrative to the prevailing ideologies that, in an attempt to equalize everything, often ignore real differences in competence. Yet without any balancing force, this return to Darwinism risks spiraling into a kind of brutal elitism that justifies extreme self-interest in societal division in ways that disregard the moral and spiritual frameworks that once tempered it, i.e., modernity. Though what is considered a heretic is relative to where you live, truthfully speaking, and I would say we have split America into two groups, Christians and nihilists. Now for me growing up, most of the adults I knew were dejected and nihilistic Gen Xers who hated the baby boomers for neglecting them as children and looked at progress as the ultimate goal to pursue because the Christianity of their parents lost its cultural power. Nietzsche's critique was that the mere statement of faith was cowardly, and that it was instead in action that one truly demonstrated his beliefs. But to contrast with the nihilists was my dad, who genuinely tried in every way to act out his Christian faith to the best of his ability. Even if the faith from times past is truly dead, then all I can say is he acted out the beliefs, where I genuinely think he believed them in his heart. Now, full disclosure, only half of my family is Christian. My mother is an atheist who wants all religions exterminated from the face of the planet. But I always respected my dad's side of the family for busting out things like Proverbs 14:23. All hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. And that strong belief, affirming his life, maybe without even realizing it, inspired me. Had it not been for him actively speaking of the joy of hard working while threatening to kick my ass if I stepped out of line, I'd have probably been much less put together. As a kid, I'd find myself making cereal in the morning when all of a sudden, "You know, son, I just have to say I love Mondays. It's just so amazing to get up in the morning and know you have another productive day ahead of you." Dad, are you sure we're related? All the while, my mom had a very different idea of how to raise me.
You know, when I was in my early 20s, we called these breakfast bowls. You want some honey?
I'm okay, Mom. Today was a bit of a deep dive on nihilism and Friedrich Nietzsche. I hope you liked it. If there's anything from today's video I hope to have gotten across, is that we should be living to affirm our existence in this time that keeps us spiritually asleep. While the problems of morality remain unanswered, at the very least, I am hoping that these ideas influence some of you in your journeys in discovering your true selves. Considering that I can only post 2 times a month, I decided to create a second channel so I can keep in touch with you guys a little more often, so please check it out, link in the description. Otherwise, Scrutly Mutley.